onto the build. First step is to print out the plans. I use Adobe Reader, which is a free program. Open the PDF with the plans and print them out in poster mode. And what that does is it prints the big sheet in multiple small sheets if you've got A4 or letter size America, wherever you are. And then use the alignment marks to glue those together into a sort of a chessboard to make the main big plan. Easy way to do that, I like to cut the overlapping edge, so trim to the alignment marks on one piece of paper, overlap that one on the other one, line up the alignment marks, a couple of bits of tape top and bottom to hold it in place, and then move on to the next join, trim, overlap, tape again, until eventually you've got the whole plan in front of you. And then to transfer the plan to the sheets of foam, there's two ways. I think probably either you can stick the plans onto the foam. They're arranged that they will fit onto a standard size, certainly the foam I could buy here in the UK anyway, fit onto a single sheet of foam, and you can stick them on with 3M77 spray, or you can cut some gaps where there's nothing much going on the plan and use some masking tape just to hold them in place, and then you can cut directly round the marks on the plan. Or actually what I like to do, which I think is a little easier, I cut out each of the components as a template and then use some masking tape to stick the template onto the foam and go around the edge with a biro, just with the biro keeping some pressure onto the inside. Now, because the paper's quite thin, sometimes it'll slip and you'll go onto the template and make a biro mark. Doesn't matter, just go back and carry on. And it actually doesn't take very long at all to transfer the shapes onto the foam. And anything internal to the piece, so for example in the case of this wing panel, you've got these slots at the end where the ailerons are going to be separated. You can use a pin to poke through to mark the junction of each of the spaces to get the shape across, or you can cut directly those two lines through the plans with your knife, whichever you prefer. But get everything transferred onto the foam and then you're ready to go. So there are alignment marks in some places on the plans. Just transfer those across to the foam because that will make lining up the parts accurately much easier later on. That's why they're there. But otherwise, cut out the pieces and then we're ready to get building. Excellent. Okay, so we're going to start first with the main wing panel. So I've got the panel cut out here. What I haven't done yet is cut the end slots for the ailerons, but they're marked on with a biro. So I'm just going to get my metal rule and my knife, and I'm going to quickly just cut those 1, 2. If you're unclear if you've marked them out correctly, the one on the outboard end of the wing is 25 millimeters long, and the one on the inboard is 30 millimeters. So you can just double check if you've got them right if you're unconcerned. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to align my ruler to the ends of those two marks, and I'm going to do a light cut. So I'm only going to aim to cut 50% of the way through the foam here. So I'm not aiming to cut all the way through to the bottom. I'm just going to go partially through up to that edge. There we go. Now, if you go too far and you separate the piece, don't worry, that's not the end of the world. We can deal with that. But first of all, with the two edges cut completely and with that piece partly cut, we should be able to fold that back on itself. If it's proving a little tricky, what you can do is just go back and run the knife over one more time, just to slightly deepen the cut. And if you go very carefully, you should be able to follow that line quite accurately. And then up we go, and you'll see I've separated there at the end. Doesn't matter at all, we'll deal with that later. So I'm going to fold the aileron back on itself. Now I need to cut a bevel at about 45 degrees, which will allow the aileron to move up as well as down. So you can either cut that freehand along there with a knife if you're super confident. You can put a metal straight edge and cut along the edge, or if you're worried about using a knife, you can actually just sandpaper a bevel on there. It doesn't really matter which way you do it. I am going to try and do it with a knife. It's a bit tricky doing this with a camera pointing at me, but let's see how we do. Let's move those fingers out of the way. There we go, all the way across. There. Just pull that away. There we go. And you can see there where I've got the ailerons completely separated, but doesn't matter. The bevel is there. Fold it down flat. Now we're going to use some wide sticky tape to make a hinge for that aileron. I've got clear tape here. This is just ordinary packing tape like you would use for cardboard boxes when you were moving house. If you've got colored tape, that's fine. Even the brown stuff that you often get for the boxes is fine. Doesn't really matter. I'm using clear because it's what I have handy, and because I'm going to go for a color scheme where the top of the wing is basically plain white. So what I'll do is let's just separate that tape there like that. And now I'm going to put the tape, just get that aileron held nicely in place. And I'm going to arrange to have the tape 50% each side of that hinge mark. There we go, all the way. And I've gone past the end of the aileron at each end. Got a few crinkles in the tape, doesn't matter. It's going to fly just as well. There we go. Now I've actually taped over those ends. So the last thing I'm going to do is get my knife and just go back in and recut those slots at the end where I've gone in. And now I've got a movable aileron. And then the last thing I'm going to do, I've got a little piece of wire here, control rod wire, and I'm just going to run that down through that slot, backwards and forwards. And what that does is it just deforms the foam slightly and opens up the slot, just so you don't get any friction there with the hinge sticking. And now with that bevel on the back, you can see that that aileron can go up as well as down. I've got nice free movement there. Go across, do the same thing on the other side. Okay, so the next piece is going to be the small or the shorter top piece of the wing. And just to show you how quickly I can cut these out, just getting my straight edge and all the straight lines on this piece. Just use a ruler and go literally that fast. And then these curved edges, just do those freehand, put the knife in, follow just inside the biro line, because remember the biro you marked outside the paper plan. Let's go super accurate on that one. Boom, there we go. And then back, straight edge on the front, and so on. Now before we do any gluing of that extra piece of wing, first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to tape the underside of the main wing piece. So that's the piece where you've got the bevels cut into it, so it's flat on the top, so that bit looks the smartest. On the bottom, we're going to run packing tape full width, side to side, across pretty much the whole of the underside of the wing. I'm going to leave the front 10mm spare, because I'm going to sand and bevel that leading edge to make it a bit more streamlined later. But apart from that, I'm going to tape the whole underside of the wing. There's a couple of reasons for doing that. The first one is for, sorry about the noise. So the first one is for strength. Believe it or not, while I reach across myself, the tape's actually going to add a lot of strength. There we go. Because it will form effectively a spar across the wing. I'm just going to go from the edge of the aileron cut out on each side. There we go. Nice and flat, no wrinkles, perfect. So the first thing that does is in flight, the flight loads when the wing is trying to bend, this stops the bottom edge of the wing cracking and falling apart, so it makes the wing quite a bit stronger. Now the other thing it does is, because this is a belly lander, if you live in a country like I do, I'm in the UK, and in the winter the ground gets wet and it gets muddy, and when you land your plane in the wet and the mud, it gets to be a bit of a mess. And if the whole underside of the plane is shiny tape, you can just get a paper towel, wipe all the mud and the rubbish off, and it looks clean again, so it's good. So whole of the bottom of the wing, where the ailerons are, cut the slots in the side again. You can lightly cut again down the slot where the hinge is, and the bit on the back on this back piece of the aileron, you can just fold that down and push it onto the front of the bevel. But take the whole of the underside of the wing and then flip it over, and we're ready to glue on the top piece. Okay, I've got the top shorter piece of the wing that goes now on top of the lower wing. It should fit really, really precisely, and if you line up the edges left and right, then the center marks that you've already got marked on should line up in the center of the wing. And if all that's good, then you're ready to glue this onto the wing. A quick word on hot glue before we do that. If your glue gun has really high temperature, then the glue might damage the foam and might not be a suitable glue to use. So get a piece of scrap foam, put a bit of hot glue on it, just see what happens. If it eats into the foam and melts the foam, then your glue gun, I'm afraid, is not going to be suitable, and you'll either have to find a different one or use a different kind of glue. You can use PVA, you can use sort of indoor adhesive used for putting up moldings on the walls or something. In the UK, there's a brand, No More Nails. Whatever you're going to use, test it on a bit of scrap foam. Make sure it works. Make sure you can put it on reasonably thin, so you're not going to add too much weight, especially if you're hoping to get the plane under 250 grams. But assuming that's all good, then once you've decided what kind of glue you use, go ahead. I've got a glue gun here, so assuming it's up to temperature, I'm going to lightly put some glue on the underside of the wing here. Going to run a bead all along the front and down to the tips. Another one along the trailing edge. And then a bit more down the middle. Try not to use too much because I'm hoping to keep this plane under 250 grams. There we go, flip that around. So what I'm going to do is put that down and slide it round a minute, get that glue spread. There we go. And then line up the leading edge, line up the tips of the wing, and we should have our center lines marked, lined up quite nicely. So just keep some pressure on this while it sets. If you would like, you can use your metal rulers to spread the load. You can put some pressure on with your hands. You can stand up and push down with your weight if you think that's going to help, and give it 30 to 60 seconds. Make sure everything is set. I'm way out of camera shot now, so this is really not the highest of production values, but hey, it's going to do the job. And with that done, you've got a step in the wing, that top piece is on, ready to move on and start to build the fuselage. Before we move on, a quick word on variations to the design. If you're going to run this off a little 1806 motor, 850 milliamp 3S battery or 2S battery, whatever you've got, that in the basic model, then you'll hit under 250 grams, and the wing, like this, 2 sheets of foam, tape on the underneath, is strong enough to cope with the flight loads as you fly like that. If you want to build one of these to go faster, and I've got a 2207 drone motor in one of these, and that will do an easy 70 mile an hour, more like 85 downwind, then, and it's a bigger battery, it's a 1300 battery, then you've got a lot more speed, a lot more weight, and this wing is going to get a lot more bending load. But a tape on the underneath is not going to be strong enough. So what you need to do is put a spar in the wing, and it doesn't really matter what you use. So what you do, the top sheet of the foam here, before you glue it onto the bottom wing, put a line straight at right angles to the direction, so equal distance back from the trailing edge forward. So about maybe 2/3 of the way back along here. Cut a slot in this top piece wide enough to fit whatever you want to put in for a spar. If you want to go really fancy, you can use a 6mm carbon fiber tube and then use some filler to smooth out the gap on the top. If you want to go cheapskate like me, this is pine, I guess, from the local DIY store. It's the kind of thing you would use for putting around the edge of windows or something. It's 6mm thick, 11 millimeters wide. So 6mm is exactly the thickness of the foam. So you can cut a slot full width, glue that in there, and that is absolutely bomb proof. In fact, I think you can get probably 6mm square, which obviously less than half the weight, and that would be better. I just got this stuff because it was what they had. But doesn't really matter what you use, but drop something into that top piece before you glue it together. And if you want to know how to do that, what I would do is cut the slot, get a bit of masking tape. Here we go, well, painter's tape, I think you call it in the States. I would tape the spar to the foam where it's going to be. You can then open it up. You can run a bead of hot glue in there, squeeze it shut, get a bit of scrap foam and remove the excess glue. When that has set, put the other piece of foam on the tape on the back. Same procedure, open it up, glue, put it down flat on the board, squeeze out the excess. Once all that is set, tape goes away, and now you've got a foam, I don't know, scrap foam on the front, no, but you've then got the top piece of the wing with a spar embedded in it, and then you can glue that to the other piece of the wing, just like I just did for the standard version. So if you want to go nuts on the speed, put something in to strengthen the wing. Okay, actually, before we get to the fuselage, I'm going to do one last thing on the wing because it's going to be easier to do while it's separate from the fuselage. At the moment, we've got these two bits of foam stuck together, and we've got this big square front edge. We're going to give that a nice streamlined round shape just to cut the drag a little. So what I'm going to do to speed up the process, you can just sand it all the way around if you want, but actually what I'm going to do is I'm going to cut a bevel, small bevel top and bottom. So let's just quickly do 45 degrees on there. There we go on the top one. Flip the wing over, and you'll see now why I've left the tape back on the underside, and I've got a mark here where the fuselage edge will be. It doesn't really matter, but just so I don't go too far, let's take a little bit off there as well. There we go. So already that's given my wing a bit of shape on the front, and what I'll now do is get a piece of not too rough sandpaper. This is 150 grit. It's going to make a lot of noise on the camera, apologies for that. And it's really quick. I'll just do this little bit on the edge here. Just on the top there, gives me a bit of a radius onto the front. Same onto the bottom. That's it, done. So do that along the leading edge, both sides of the wing, and then you can put a little bit of shaping on the wingtip as well, just to take that sharp edge off the top, just on that front piece. You can leave the back square, and that will make it, firstly, it looks a bit better, and secondly, it cuts down on the drag. And finally, once you've got the shape, what I like to do is get a piece of tape, put it vertically on the front, and then wrap it over top and bottom, so you've got a smooth tape edge on the front. Again, helps just if you get any bangs or dings on the leading edge, gives a bit of extra strength, but also when you're landing on the mud, you can just give it a wipe and it gets nice and clean, and the mud doesn't get into the foam, which then is kind of hard to get it looking nice after you've cleaned it out. So okay, onto the fuselage. Okay, next step, we're going to try and make this thing start to look like a plane. So I've got my completed wing, I've sanded my leading edge, I've got my flaps, ailerons rather, moving with the tape hinges. I've got my two sides of the fuselage, and I've got little rectangles F1 and F2. And just for check, I've got the servo I'm going to put in. If you want to build it under 250 grams, you're going to need 5 gram servos. I'm not fussed for this one, so I'm going to use 9 grams. They're super cheap. Just make sure that those cutouts for the servo, which are just here in the fuselage, are big enough for those to slot in. And if you need to adjust, then adjust, but they're all good, so I'm fine. And then the last thing is, you'll see at the back of the fuselage, you've got these big square lumps, and there's a dotted line on the plan, a red dotted line, which is a half cut. And it says in green, we're going to remove this later. So you should have a half cut on there. If you've accidentally cut that piece off, doesn't matter. You can just stick it back on for now with some masking tape. That's fine. But assuming that they are done, try and make sure that the half cut that you've got sits on the outside. So I'm going to have this one here and this one here, because I've got a cut on the outside there and a cut on the outside of that one there. There we go. The other thing you're going to need is a biro, because we're going to mark where the glue goes to make this process easier. So first step, let's put the fuselage sides to one side. Get the big rectangle F1. That's the rectangular form that makes a fuselage shape. You'll see there's a little circle drawn in the top corner, and I've poked a hole through that with some control wire already, because that's where the wire is going to go through from the servo once we put that in. And I'm just going to put a little bit of glue on the front edge at the bottom, and I'm going to push that into this gap in the back of the wing here. So let's squidge that glue around, put that in place there. Make sure that's sitting vertically. And then if you want to grab a piece of scrap glue to take the scrap foam, get the excess glue away, that's fine. I'm not too fussed. I'm just going to leave that there. In fact, I'm just going to squidge that. Now it's cool with my finger. That's good enough. Careful about burning your fingers. Don't do what I did. Okay, so that is now firmly in place. So that now gives me the alignment to put my fuselage sides on, because they're going to sit against F1 and they're going to sit against this tab that sticks out on the front of the upper wing. So let's grab the first of my fuselage sides and make sure that the half cut is on the outside edge, which it is on this one. So we are good to go. So firstly, a quick test fit. We push on against this edge here and against F1. Should sit in place quite nicely, which it does. And I'm going to get my biro. I'm going to turn this around so you can see. And I'm going to mark in that edge just in there. And behind F1. And when I remove that, that gives me a place where F1 is. And it also means I know how far my wing goes at the bottom. So the wing stops at the back of F1, so it sort of stops there. So what I'm now going to do, spin that around again. I'm going to put some glue on this. So I'm going to glue on the bottom edge, little dab there, and then in this front section here where it's going to sit on top of the wing. So get my hot glue gun, down the bottom, little blob there, across that upper section of the wing, and then finally vertically up the side where F1 is going to go. I'll spin this around actually so you can see it. It's going to be slightly awkward to do it from this side, but let's push that in there. There we go. And just a quick visual check that it's straight. So look front to back, just make sure everything's fine. And the front edge, which doesn't have a former to keep it vertical, just check by eye that it's about right. And that looks pretty good to me. If you want to squeegee away any excess glue, piece of scrap foam, but I don't seem to have much there. So that's the first one done. And you'll see that when I sit the fuselage flat on the ground, this back piece here is just touching the board. If your board's nice and flat, if you build this on the best, flattest surface you've got, if you've got like a really nice kitchen worktop that's super smooth, then that will make sure that everything is nicely aligned. So let's get the second fuselage piece. Dry fit, make sure everything's fine. Biro mark on the inside, just so I can see where F1 goes. Mark on the bottom so I can see where the line is, and then same again. Hot glue down the bottom. Little dab in front of the servo cutout along the top of the wing. Now actually what I didn't do on the other one, which I could do, is just put a little bit on that inside edge there, it doesn't really matter, where it'll go against the wing, and finally vertically where F1's going to be. Same procedure, in place at the front, drop it down, push it against F1, and then make sure everything's straight. If you've got a slight boomerang between this front point and the back point, you'll be able to see the back, the curve will make it go out of straight, but you can adjust that just by looking. Now everything moves while this glue hasn't set, so that's all good. Bit of excess glue there, again done it with my finger because it was cooling down already. So those are in place, and if I lift everything up, those back pieces look nice and straight. Everything's glued, servo cutouts, so good to go. So at that point, we're going to do one last thing, which is we're going to put F2 in. If you haven't got those back pieces square, this is your opportunity to fix it. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to put a little bit of glue on one side of F2, and I'm going to glue it in the back horizontally just in front of this cutout where the elevator is going to go. So let's just put that on one side in there. Make sure it doesn't stick up above the top, because you're going to have a top piece of the fuselage is going to go in place there. Let that dry for a moment. Now what you're going to do is we're now going to drop a bit of glue on the other side, and what you can see is if it isn't square, if the tail is going one way or the other, you can align it, and as it moves, F2 moves relative to the side, and in doing that, that actually allows you to correct any sort of wonkiness that you got in there in the first place. Now I'm just going to put my arm, I've got one of these building boards, so I've got cross lines, but if you haven't got that, doesn't matter, you can do this by eye. Settle it, just put a tiny bit of glue in there. It's not needed for strength, this is literally just for alignment, so it doesn't need much glue. Make sure the tail's pointing straight, align those nicely. A little bit that way, I think. No, other way, there we go. Perfect. Squidge away any excess glue. That is looking absolutely spot on, straight down the middle. Perfect, okay. So at that point, we're going to put this to one side, and we're going to just quickly cut out and hinge the rear elevator ready to fit that. Right, I've got the horizontal stabilizer cut out. I've got the alignment marks transferred with biro so I can see those for later. And I've got what on the plan is the red dotted line where the hinge is for the elevator. So I'm going to get my knife, get my metal ruler, and I'm going to line it up along that line. And then like we did with the ailerons, I'm going to aim to do a 50% cut. So not all the way through, just lightly along that straight edge. And like before, if we go slightly too far, it's not the end of the world. Okay, so let's see if that will flex. Not quite, so I'm going to go once more, a little deeper. Just following that first line. And careful not to put too much pressure on, but also aware that if I do, and nobody's dying here. This is not brain surgery. Okay, there we go. That's now flexing. There we go. So, same as before, we're going to flex that back, and we're going to cut a 45-degree bevel to allow it to go both ways. Now, on the ailerons, we cut the bevel into the moving surface, into the aileron itself. In this case, I'm actually going to flip it over, and I'm going to put the bevel on the main piece. Now, to do that, I'm going to get some scrap foam. Oh, come on, there we go. And put it underneath there, just to stabilize that while I press on it. Let's get my metal edge. Same as before, angle the bevel, cut along the ruler, and also same as before, if you don't want to do this with a knife, you can sand this bevel. Really doesn't matter how you do it, as long as you get some material cut away to give some relief to allow that to flex in both directions. I need a little bit more off the middle, and actually let's demonstrate. So if you're not going to do this with a knife, don't need that anymore. I can just get some sandpaper, and where that excess material is, just give that a little bit of a sand down to that line. There we go. Because I can see a vertical edge, I just need to get rid of that. There we go. And now that's bending down, perfect. And then last but not least, we need a hinge on there. So same as before, clear tape, sorry about the noise, it's slightly longer than I need. And then just pushing that down gently onto there we go. Try and get the tape without any crinkles, but it doesn't matter if you have a few. Now my tape is slightly too wide, so it's gone over the edges at the back, and obviously it's slightly too long. So just get my knife, trim that piece, trim that piece, stick those face to face just so we don't make so much mess. And then same again, I've got a little bit sticking out here. Let's just run the knife along the edge of the foam. That will remove that little triangle of sticky tape. Last but not least, I've got one on this side, same again. So those are those pieces that were sticking out on that rear edge and on the side, and now I've got a nice hinge on there. It gives me some movement in both directions. The other thing I'm going to do is I'm going to tape again, as we did before, on the wing, the underside of the elevator. Just one broad piece of tape to give that some stiffness. Again, for visibility, I'm probably going to use the red tape. That's big enough. Get the knife. And I'm going to put that just in from the hinge line so I don't have to mess around with getting involved in the hinge shape. There we go. Trust me, you will be glad of the colour later on, because this plane is quite small, and depending on what motor you put in it, it can be quite fast, and it gets a long way pretty quickly. There we go. It's a bit of colour. If you want, you can do the whole underside. It's up to you. This is, but some tape, even clear tape underneath, just to give that added strength again to stop this cracking on the underside with any flight loads. So that looks pretty good. Got my alignment marks. Now I'm ready to fit that to the fuselage. So I've got my fuselage back on the build table. I've got my elevator here. Now actually, looking at it, I've got my alignment marks on the wrong side. So I've got them on the underside, but we're going to fit it from above. So what I'll just quickly do with the biro, let's transfer that across up the leading edge. I need a mark just a couple of millimeters long each side on that front edge just there, because what you'll see is that they align here with the outside edges of the fuselage and allow me to get this piece central. So easy peasy. Glue gun, bit of glue on the front edge, and then align the top. Try to be a little sparing with the glue, not too much, because we're operating at the tail here and you don't want a heavy tail on a plane, although balance on this thing is not a problem. The battery should be more than enough. So plane held nice and firmly down on the building board. Get this piece and then just sit it nicely centrally on there. And just gently press down. Now those tabs underneath are stopping me pushing the fuselage, bending it out of shape, and they're making sure that the elevator is going on parallel to the wing. So it's making sure that everything builds nice and square. A few seconds to allow that to dry. There we go. And if I look down the plane, that's looking pretty square. So pretty happy with that. Excellent. Okay, on to the next step. Okay, flip the plane upside down, and here I've got my partially cut lines where these two square blocks are. I need those to be removed now, because I'm now going to put the underside piece on that's going to stiffen up the tail, but those have helped me align that tail nice and square. So I can just get my knife, find that little half cut line, just go through again. There we go, it's just going to pull off like that. Same on the other side. There we go, bit of glue on the back there, but they're come off nicely. If there's any edges aren't quite right, just use a bit of sandpaper. But now I've got my surface ready to put the underside of the fuselage on to start to build up that box structure, which is what's going to make it strong. Right, now it's time to box up the fuselage structure and give it some strength. So first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to get the piece that goes at the underside of the back. It's got a little slot in where a fin's going to go in later. Just make sure it fits nicely. The width is correct on the fuselage. It should be perfect all the way along if you follow the instructions. And if you push down flat at the back, the fuselage will just rock slightly, but everything will then sit so that the tailplane is flat on the table. The front should be flat on the table. Make sure the wings are parallel. If everything looks fine, we're good to go. So all we need to do is, probably the easiest thing to do is look where the back of the tailplane goes, and you can either, I'll tell you what we're going to do. We're going to put the glue on here. Let's do that. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to lightly put some glue down each side of the fuselage on this underside, all the way along. And again, don't be too heavy with the glue on the tail of the plane, just that's a good habit to be in. It actually doesn't matter much on this one, but for future. And then this piece, a little on the front edge where it's going to butt up against the back of the wing, and a little bit on the bottom, each side of the slot, like that. So each side of the slot, front, down both of the sides. And then from the front edge, I'm going to push that into the back behind the wing, get it central, and then gently down and down onto the bottom there. Make sure everything looks square. If you need to, get a piece of scrap foam, just run it down the side, and that will, any glue that's squeezing out will get pulled out. I'll do the same at the back here. There we go. And finally, just at the top there. There we go. Just keep a little pressure on that for about 30 seconds or so. Just let the glue set. Everything looks to be nice and square. Wings are parallel to the board. Tailplane is pushed flat on the board, so everything's nice and square. And then when we think that's getting set, flip it over, and now you've got that box structure in the back, and you can look down the plane. That looks pretty good to me. That's all good. Okay, and weighs very little. Now we're going to do the same thing and put the underside on the front, and remember to cut the little triangle in it. That's just a cooling intake for air to go in where your ESC and battery are going to be sat, just to make sure that everything doesn't get too hot, particularly if you're going to run high power motors in it. But on 1806, probably less critical. So onto the front underside. Okay, so here's the piece that's going to go underneath at the front. The triangle goes pointing forwards to make it go faster. Not really. Doesn't matter. Now this, we want it to curve underneath. So what we're going to do, take the piece of foam, put it at the edge of the table, and just pull your hand back, sort of, so you rub the foam over the edge of the table and just give it a slight bend. If you've ever watched the flight test build videos, you'll see they do this with foam board all the time. It's really easy, just a couple of goes and it's like that. And then just have a look how that fits, and actually that's pretty much perfect. So what we're going to do, same as last time. So you'll see there's a little bit of a shelf there from the alignment piece in the front. So we can put a little glue along the top and on the front of the wing, and then down both of these surfaces here. So let's do that. Both of those surfaces down the front, like that. And then front of the wing, and a little on the top there. There we go. And now with the plane upside down, we get that piece with that nice curve on it. Push it into the back there, down onto that glued surface. Make sure everything's going together quite nicely. There we go, that's all nice. And again, bit of scrap foam. If you've got any glue that's coming out the side, just smooth it off with a piece of scrap foam and you are good to go. There we are. Perfect. And now you'll see we've got a fuselage that's got the floor all the way along and it's starting to get a nice box structure. And this is starting to show up what's probably the most unusual thing about this plane. Because it's designed to be really easy to build, all the electronics are going to go in it before we put the top on. We're going to literally build this open box, then we've got complete easy access to everything. If you've got big fat clumsy hands like I have, then getting into the corners on little models is probably the trickiest part of building them. This way, everything is open and accessible until you're happy that everything is working how you want it to work, at which point we're going to close it up. So the next step, we're just going to put the doublers on the front, inside this front edge here. Right, now we're just going to add the doublers inside the front edge of the fuselage. So firstly, cut 2 pieces out and just quickly make sure that they fit in there nicely. They should push up against the front edge of the wing there, and they should go flush with the front edge of the underside. And they might need a push down because you might have some glue in that corner that's just getting in the way, but once you've got more hot glue in there, well, that's going to loosen up anyway. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to get this, I'm going to put some glue along the bottom edge, and then I'm going to put bottom, middle, top, and then just drop that into place there, and then squeeze it down and hard up against the side so it bonds onto the bottom and onto the side piece. Bit of scrap foam and glue that's squeezing out. There we go. And then same on the other side. So same again. It's going to go. They should put glue on the right side, just saying. Glue on the bottom. And then bottom, middle, top. Push that down into position, hard up against the side. There we go. And then a bit of excess glue just squeezing out the top. Let's give that a push. There we go. That glue is just starting to solidify. That's good. So what you've now got is a wide double thickness on the top there, glued into the bottom. That gives that nose some extra strength, and the firewall that the motor's going to mount on is going to go straight back on there. So have a look at the front. That should all line up nice and square, nice and thick, and ready now to put the firewall and the motor in. Okay, time for the firewall and the motor. So the firewall is just a thin, stiff sheet of whatever you can get. I have plywood. This is not special model light ply, it's just regular thin plywood. In fact, let's see how thin it is. It is 3 millimeters. So if you haven't got plywood, a thick sheet of rigid plastic, if you've got it, it really doesn't matter what this is made out of. It just needs to be something that won't get too hot or melt if the motor gets crazy hot, which is not going to. So anything, 3mm plywood. Your motor will probably need a little clearance hole drilled in the middle here if the shaft protrudes on the back. Drill 2 of the 4 holes is more than enough to hold these little motors in place, and mount the motor to the firewall with 2 of the little screws that come supplied with the motor. This is an 1806 drone motor, 2300 kV, really standard stuff. And then drill a hole in the corner to allow the wires to pass through. Don't drill so near the edge. Remember, it's going to overlap the 6mm foam, so it needs to be 6mm in from the side and the bottom. And then once that's mounted, and the joy of doing this when it's not already on the plane is everything is so accessible. The screws go in really easily. Just make sure those are tight on the back. There we go. That's all good. And then unbelievably, that literally is just going to squeeze down into there. It'll sit on the front of the doublers, so you can put glue on the front surface of the doublers, and you can put glue on the front surface of the base. So it's literally just hot glue on there, there, and there. And then keeping the wires out of the way, that just pushes back onto there. You can make sure the sides of the fuselage are square and butted up against it. That's sitting nicely in place. And then just have a look from above and from the side. It should be pointed straight in all directions. If it's slightly out again, don't worry, that's not a problem, because what you can do is you can slacken off those two screws while it's still easily accessible. And if you want to angle it in any direction, get a thin piece of card. Plastic card is quite good. So if you get those sort of loyalty cards from supermarkets or whatever, anything like that, those little sort of credit card things, cut a little piece of the plastic, slide it underneath one edge of the motor to angle that bit of the motor forward, tighten the screws up again. That's all you need to do. So if it's not perfect when you get it in there, don't worry, not a big deal, you can fix it later. Okay, that's the firewall in place. I need to solder on some bullet connectors to connect the ESC. But next step is to put in the rest of the electronics, so servos for the ailerons and the elevator. Okay, let's fit the aileron servos first. So if you want the plane to be under 250 grams, then you'll need 5-gram servos. This one I don't care, so I've got a cheap 9-gram servo. These are just the bog standard things you'll get from the local hobby store or off the internet, eBay or Amazon or wherever. So the first thing we'll do is slide the servo into place. The end with the control arm goes at the front, and the body, the longer body, goes behind, which should, depending on your servos, will probably point the wiring forwards to the front of the plane. So that should just pop in smoothly through those cutouts in the side. If you need to expand those, just get a knife or a bit of sandpaper, make sure your servos fit. And then to fit the servo in place, all you actually need is a little drop of hot glue down behind each of the sort of ears that stick out the side, and then push it back in. I'm not going to glue this right now, but that's all you do. And wiring's nice and accessible then inside to put the receiver in. Now, to fit your control horn, first thing you want to do is make sure the servo is centered. I've got a centering tool here where you can just set it, plug the servo in, but if you haven't got one of those, you can plug it into your receiver, make sure all your trims are set to 0. So that is the aileron centered. And when you fit the arm to the servo arm, usually you'll find there's one notch will be pointed slightly forwards, one notch will be pointed slightly backwards. Put the arm pointing slightly backwards, so in towards the tail of the plane as I'm looking on this side. Same on the other side, so both the horns are slightly angled a few degrees, 5-10 degrees max, towards the rear of the plane. The reason you do that rather than forward is because that will lift the aileron slightly more than it will push it down, and that will actually help turn the plane in the direction that you want to go. It just makes it fly a bit smoother. So once you've got that done, you then bend a piece of control wire to be the right length, and the way I do that is put the front end into the servo. I'm on the second hole out, so I'm going to go for quite low throws here, and then bend it so that when it sits horizontally, the bit at 90 degrees, it's going to go through the control horn, sits directly above the hinge line. And then I can just push. These are 3D printed control horns. You can cut them out of plywood, again out of plastic if you've got old cards, bank cards or whatever, doesn't really matter. Cut those out and then mark where that's going to go in the wing. With the control horn, that piece sits directly above the hinge. And what you can then do is just get the knife where I've marked where that control horn's going to drop into the wing. You've got the tape there, obviously, on the top. Just get your knife, cut through the tape, and then that should push easily through in place, like that. There we go. And then we can just drop some hot glue from the top where that slot is now. Drop the control horn in place, and with the servo in place, that's everything on that side. Same on the other side. Right, now onto the elevator servo, which glues on the side of the fuselage. I'll put a little photograph in here, just immediately in front of F1. The control horn is at the front end, away from the firewall there, or the bulkhead. Glue the servo to that side with hot glue. If you're concerned that seems a bit shonky, and it does to me, if you want to stiffen that up, what you can do is just get a piece of scrap foam, cut it to fit exactly in that gap to the side of the servo, and you can put that in place there, and then that servo is braced, it can't twist away, and that will make it absolutely impossible to shift. Now I've actually had to put a 5 gram in there because I've run out of 9 gram servos, which means it's lower, and the hole through that bulkhead for this control wire to go is lower down, but I've just poked it through with a wire. If you're using something relatively lightweight for this control rod at the rear, then you'll need to put it into some kind of plastic sleeve. You can use coffee stirrers if you're in America. A drinking straw, especially if you find a nice small plastic one, would be ideal. But whatever you can find. I've used paper drinking straws, and when they've been too bigger diameter, because you want quite a nice close-ish fit, no friction, but not too much wobbling on the wire. What you can actually do is get a knife, trim along it and roll it in on itself, make it a little smaller, just put some tape along it and reduce the diameter of the drinking straw. But bottom line, you want the servo in place here, control rod, whatever you're going to use, out to the back, and you'll see I've already bent the wire, and again that hinge point is directly above the hinge point for the elevator. And then we're just going slightly off center here. We're about 15 mil off from the center line. Got another control horn here, so let's pop that on there at the back. So now we've got the get out of the way. Clear some space. So now we've got the servo at the back. I can again get a biro, put that control horn up vertically just off the center line there, as we've said. Mark where that's going to go, and then get a knife. Again, you should have the clear tape for the hinging on the top here. Cut a slot. In fact, maybe cut 2 slots about 1 millimeter apart from each other, and then you can just remove the bit of tape from the top, and it might make it a little easier to poke that one through. So let's do that. Poke that through in there, and we want that surface to be absolutely level, so that just wants to go forward ever so slightly, and we need that servo to be centered. So again, what I'm going to do, put a battery into my servo tester. There we go. Set that for neutral. Plug the servo in. There we go, that's neutral, and then just make sure that that is in exactly the right position. Once we're happy, bit of hot glue. And push that control horn down. Squidge that glue about a bit, make lots of surface area, squidge that down in place, and then just make sure that surface is level. There we go. That glue's hardening nicely. Okay, so our surfaces are the elevator's level, and you'll see because we pushed the control horns in to the ailerons when everything was flat on the table like this. The wing's got a flat underside. We pushed down onto the flat surface, so these ailerons are absolutely perfect, dead level. So that means our control surfaces should be nicely accurately positioned. So now you can see we've got complete access to all the electronics. So there's my speed controller. I can bundle up the wiring and tuck that in place in the front, make sure it's in the right place. I've got 3 wires. I can now position my receiver, and usually what I'll do is I'll put a bit of double-sided tape and I'll just stick that to the side of the fuselage there, poke a hole through the bulkhead, and I can put my antenna for the receiver out in the back here. And if it's a diversity antenna, that's one with two aerials. What you can do is the last sort of 1.5 inch, sort of 35 mil, I think, of the wire that's the antenna is the bit that's actually receiving the signal. So what you want is the 2 of them at right angles for best reception. So get a bit of masking tape. You can put one of them, tape it to the side of the fuselage, pointing straight back to the tail. And then another one you can glue to the base, this underside piece here, going across. So you can go along and then 90 degrees right, put a piece of tape over it. And that way you've got both those antennae at 90 degrees, and you've got complete access to all of this while you do that. So put the receiver in, bundle all this wiring out neatly out of the way in this space here behind the step on the wing, receiver antenna through into the back, speed control tucked out of the way in the front, and then you can do a quick rough balance test. You can put your battery in place, sitting just on this surface on the front of the wing about here, right on the top there, and start to see if it's balancing in roughly the right place, because we're not going to add much more weight now. There's a bit of foam for the tail at the back, but that will give you a rough balance point. That will tell you where the battery's going to go. You can put down some self-adhesive Velcro to that flat surface on the wing, and then that's where your battery's going to go. And now we're ready to do the last pieces. So the first thing is I'm going to glue the underside fin into that space under there, and that will give you extra stability, particularly when you're slowing down coming into landing. If you're worried about that being a bit vulnerable and easy to damage, then to strengthen it, you can just stick a piece of clear tape or colored packing tape to either side, so that outside skin has got some strength, and then you can glue it into place. And then we're just on to gluing the top pieces. Okay, in the home straight, another day, another jumper. So we're going to start off with the covering for the fuselage at the top to close in this front box section. There's a dotted red line on the plans about halfway along this top piece. So I've just cut the piece out. I'm going to get my knife, going to do the usual 50% cut across there. There we go. And let's see if that will open up. Yeah, that's all fine. Right, now wide clear tape again, like before. I'm going to get a piece not quite as long as this upper piece, but that's probably sort of 3 inches long. See where the joint, where that fold is, and then put it halfway either side like that, and then just smooth that down like that. There we go. And then so that hinge is going to go on the inside, so we can lift up like this. We don't have to bevel it because we don't obviously have to fold in the other direction. What I'll also do is this section I'm going to have at the front. I think I'm going to put it that way, and that's just the longer pieces at the back. Again, like before, just a slight rub on that front piece on the table, just to give a slight curve to the front. I make most of the curve in that very front, sort of 1.5 inches. And then when we sit that there, that sits really nicely on the front. And then the last thing I'm going to do is get another piece of tape. Why does the edge always stick down? Answers on a postcard or in the comments. I'm going to get a piece again here about sort of 3 inches long or thereabouts, so 60-70 mil. And I'm now going to fold that back on itself so it's completely open. And I'm then going to stick that piece of tape up there. I'm going to go over the top and down the other side. And then if I push that down on there, what that's done is it's made that hinge now double-sided. That makes it much more robust and resilient, because you're going to be opening this hatch backwards and forwards lots of times. And now all I need is a bit of hot glue on the back of the firewall, and then let's see how far I need to go just to there. So on the top of the fuselage, bit extra where we're doubled up on the doubler piece, a bit more on the top there, and on the back, and then top piece squeezes in place, scrap foam to remove any excess. Make sure you don't get any glue on this rear portion that's going to lift up. That's going to give us access to put our battery in and out. And that looks pretty good. Now we go on to the back. Right, now onto the last piece that's going to close up the fuselage. This is this top deck piece. There are 2 slots cut that will align the fin that's going to go on the rear, and there's a triangular vent on the top. That's an airflow vent so that air can flow in through the underside, through that triangle under there, out through the top, and that cools the ESC and the battery in the front. Now, I've left on the plan it slightly vague deliberately, because it kind of depends what you're going to do for your control for the elevator. So we've got this, in my case, I've got quite a thick piece of wire running through. You might have that wire with a guide around it, a plastic tube or something. So the first thing you need to do is just make sure how far in that piece of wire is going to be, and we're going to cut a slit in the foam on the top like that, and the length is marked out on the plan from the front to the rear, but you can adjust it if everything is slightly different on your plane. So what that's going to do is it allows me to start to put this on with that wire you see poking through, so that now I can push everything down. So now what I need to do is the front end where this is passing through the top foam needs to be cut slightly wider, and on my plane that's in that area there. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to cut slightly wider just so I don't get any friction or binding with that control rod. Now in your case, if you've got a guide tube around it of some kind, then you cut wide enough for that guide tube just to be sitting comfortably in the gap that you've cut out in the foam. There we go. And then I'll just put a little nick in the front and the back, so that will pop out hopefully reasonably tidily. There we go. There we go. And now I should be able to push that down either side, and the control wire should just come through quite cleanly there at the back. Needs a little bit more, that slot needs to go slightly further to the rear, so let me just cut maybe another 15mm out just to make sure I don't have any friction. There we go. Push those 2 bits of foam out, and then I can push that down on there. And once that's pressed down into place, there we go. So if I put that up closer, you can see in the camera there, that gives me some clearance. And if I had a tube around the outside of this, then just at this point here where it's exiting that top piece, I could put a little hot glue just to stick that tube in place to stop it moving backwards and forwards. And with that, all I need now is a little bit of hot glue down the top, each side of the fuselage, a little bit along the top of F1, and then a little bit just on the bottom, on the back here when I push this down, and make sure that it ends just before the hinge line. If in doubt, then you can always just cut it a little shorter, and then it's just a question of, there's a bit of a curve in it, you'll see, but you push that down push that down at the front as the glue sets, and then that gives the top piece in place, and then that's the fuselage closed up. All we've got left to do now is to just put the fin on top. Okay, so we've got our battery access hatch here, and obviously we need a catch to hold that down when we're flying. Now I've experimented with lots of things. The fancy way to do it is to put a magnet in place. You put a little bit of scrap foam in there to put the magnet on top, and then a little thin piece of metal, a washer, a piece cut off the top of a tin of beans or something will do fine, and that will clunk in place. You lift it back up. But an even lighter, simpler, cheaper solution, and now my favorite one for all those reasons, is get a wide piece of tape, stick it on the rear here, start at the front of that triangle, on the top like that, fold it down underneath and wrap it round. So that gives me a piece of tape wrapped around. And now get another narrower piece of tape, like a normal sellotape width, and fold the end over back about 5mm. So I've got a little tab now that's not sticky. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to stick that on there, overlapping with that piece of tape that I just put down there at the back. There we go. So now I've got that lift up tab, open, closed. And that will stick and unstick, I don't know, 50, 100 times before it starts to lose its stickiness and not work. And as soon as it does, take it off, put another piece of tape on. It weighs as close to zero as makes no difference, costs as close to zero as makes no difference, and as you've just seen, you can do it in seconds. Beautiful battery hatch, excellent, job done. So now, only thing left to do is we've got the rear fin. This gives obviously some stability in flight. Without it, it's not going to go in a straight line. Hot glue around the tab at the front and the back, and a little bead of hot glue along the bottom, and then that should just push in place on the back there like that. And then the two extra pieces on either side that just give that a little bit of additional stiffness. So all you do with those is hot glue on the side to glue onto the fin, and a little bit of hot glue on the bottom to go onto the base piece, and make sure you stay clear of your control rod to the rear. And that's it. With that glued on there, you're ready to go flying. So assuming everything is tested and you've been able to do that before you closed up the fuselage, now you should be safely able to put a prop on the motor. Don't do that until now, because obviously you don't want to cut yourself if you accidentally set the thing running, but you should now be all good to go. And we can head out to the flying field and let's go flying.